Hey everybody, Father Warner here. It's Thursday of the sixth week of Easter. Today is the 29th of May, and we also celebrate today the memorial or the feast of Saint Paul VI, who came to India in 1964. Now, Saint Pope Paul VI, also now Pope Saint Paul VI. Whenever I go to Rome, I always go to his tomb and I pray. I hope I have a picture of it so I can put it as the display picture for this video. Anyway, our text is from Acts chapter 18, verses 1 to 8. Tomorrow, we are going to look at Acts chapter 18, verses 9 to 18. And on Saturday, it's the feast of the visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So we will end this week with chapter 18. Remember that from Sunday onwards, I am taking a break for 15 days. From the 1st of June to the 15th of June, there'll be no teaching or 5 minutes with Jesus, okay? Uh, Hang on till I come back. I need a little bit of a break, and I think I'll be a little more refreshed. Our gospel is from John chapter 16, verse 16 to 20. Now, I'm always presuming that you are reading the text. Today's Acts chapter 18, verse 1 to 8. Read that text, but if you, and I hope you're reading it, read it also with 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 10 to 18. Why? Because Paul is going to walk right into Corinth, which was south of Greece, in today's text. Now, so far, remember, Paul is on the second missionary journey. He's doing this journey with his friends Timothy and Silas. The first missionary journey was with Barnabas. The second missionary journey is in the region of Macedonia, modern day Greece. We know that he went to Thessalonica, where he writes his letters to the Thessalonians. He didn't receive much of a response. He was driven out by the Jews who were jealous of him. Yeah, and then he went to Beroa, where he met with some success. But the Jews from Thessalonica once again stir up trouble in the city. It is in Beroa that he now will leave his two friends, Timothy and Silas, and he moves to Athens, where we saw he met with very little success. And it is from Athens that he will be traveling alone in Athens. He'll be alone now when he travels from Athens to Corinth. Now, please remember, these were not little walks in the park. These were long journeys, and now long journeys coupled with loneliness. He has no friends. He's traveling alone. Long journeys coupled with thoughts of, have I failed the Lord? I have not really made converts in Athens. I have not done much on the second missionary journey. Quite interestingly, you'll see some of the most beautiful letters that Paul writes in the New Testament is to people in Greece, the Thessalonians, to the Philippians, to the Corinthians. Yeah, of course. Remember, Galatia is in modern day Turkey. So it's very interesting also to see where these letters were written, to which parts of the world. Sometimes we just hear at Mass to the Corinthians, Galatians, Thessalonians. We never ask who these people are or where they are from, and very often we are never told about these things. But much can't be communicated in a homily of 10 or 15 minutes, and that is why even these online little Bible reflections are very good for you um, to develop and to increase your knowledge of the faith, and therefore also to stimulate your heart. Now, Paul is now at Corinth today, and tomorrow's text also he'll be in Corinth. Um, and then from verse 18 onwards, of chapter 18, verse 18 onwards, he will return to Antioch. Once again, Antioch is in Syria. There were many Antiochs, but he goes back to his base. So you'll see that in next week's reading. I'm sure you'll follow it at Mass. Now, therefore, Paul, we are told in verse 1 of today's text, chapter 18, leaves Athens and he comes to Corinth, and there he finds friends. How wonderful! He finds a couple, a Jewish couple. There is no certainty at this stage that they were baptized, because they are referred to as Jewish, and we are told that they are in Corinth because they were driven out by an edict of the Emperor Claudius in around the year 49 of 50 AD. I'll talk to you a little bit more about it. But here you have this couple called Aquila. He is from a region in Pontus, close to uh, between Bithynia and Armenia, if I'm not mistaken. And then his wife Priscilla or Prisca. Now, we are told that Claudius in the year 49 had driven out all the Jews, asked them to leave from Rome, and that is why Aquila and Priscilla have chosen Corinth. Now, why were they asked to leave? They were asked to leave because there was a very interesting, there was a one of the Roman historians writing almost 70 years after this incident mentions this, that the Jews, not the Christians, the Jews are being driven out. So the Jews were indulging in constant riots at the instigation of a Chrestus. Now, I think Sostenes, the Roman historian, got the name wrong. It was must have been at at the instigation of Christ, meaning to say that these Jews were in opposition to a person called Christ or the early Christians, and therefore it led to constant rioting. The Emperor Claudius simply thought, let's solve this problem, all of you out of the city, which is, it's very harsh because families were uprooted, but this is a historical fact. Now, uh, let's look at a bit of Corinth because we need to understand, especially when you read the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, you'll wonder why is Paul talking so much on immorality. Uh, Remember, by the time that Paul left in Corinth, the community had a lot of issues from baptism to leadership, and that is why St. Paul will write back to them. But for now, it was a major city, a major Roman city. Uh, it was very important for trade. It was very important for travel. It rivaled with Athens in commerce. These two cities, Athens and Corinth, constantly fought over, their trade that came through their cities. But Corinth was notorious for its immorality. Yeah, uh, sometimes at mass people read immortality for immorality and immorality for immortality. Careful when you are reading at mass. But Corinth was notorious for its immorality. They were very immoral people. If you were told you live like a Corinthian, it meant that you were a fornicator. Yeah, that's how poorly Corinth was looked at. But I like the fact that Paul, when he left Athens, chose Corinth. Like Jesus, he goes to the least, the last, and the lost. I think very often we as priests today are sitting in the comfort of, or the safety, I won't use the word comfort, the safety of our churches. Imagine if, a priest went to the least, the last, and the lost. Who would they be today? They'd be in some very, very shady places. You know, I sometimes, very often, uh, I encounter people. I rarely go to a theater or I rarely go to some entertainment place. I used to do as a younger priest, not anymore. But I remember I would always encounter people, and I would like to dress well. Now you notice I wear the same thing practically every day, but I would dress well and I would go out and like to enjoy an evening. And you'd always find a Catholic who would be there, uh, who would want to make you feel guilty that you were having a few hours of recreation. They'll say, Father, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? So initially I used to get very disturbed. Now I don't get disturbed about them. When they say, Father, what are you doing here? I look around and I say, they say, what happened, Father? I said, am I in a brothel? What am I doing here? I'm in a theater, no? Am I in a bad place? And even if I was in a brothel, does it mean that I'm indulging in prostitution? No. I could be working. There are many religious sisters I know in the region of Bombay, of Kamatipura. I think it's the Daughters of the Cross who work among uh, the commercial sex workers. We should not impute uh, unnecessary thought and meaning that comes sometimes from our little brains and little minds and our little thoughts. Be generous with your thoughts. You see somebody in what you think is the wrong place, hang on. Don't come to your own conclusions, but I'm saying this because Paul walked into Corinth, a very immoral city. What are you going to say? Paul is an immoral man? No, he wasn't. He was a man on a mission who took him to the least, the last, and the lost. Now, excuse me, it is here that he meets Aquila and Priscilla. He will speak very well of them. At some stage, they become converts. We know that they also, as you'll see next week, they will engage with a man called uh, Apollos. And in Romans chapter 16, verses 3 to 4, St. Paul he'll show his endearment for this couple. He'll call them fellow workers. He'll say they risk their necks for his life. Please be a friend to a priest. I want to say this. I'm very blessed to have a lot of couples who are friends to me. I am very blessed. I have a very close circle of friends. I'm very guarded about it. When people want to be my friends, I think I make a new friend every year, and it takes me a long time to invest in people because unfortunately I'm a bit suspicious that why people want to get close to me. I tend to be a little suspicious. I've had very bad experiences as a young priest. I've had people chasing me, following me, jumping over walls. If I tell you some of the stories, the drama at St. Michael's while distributing communion, and it. So I'm very careful because sometimes as a priest you may say a word of affection, and somebody else takes it to mean something else. So I'm very very careful today when I make friends, and I'm cautious also. But it's good to be friends with a priest. If you have a priest friend, take care of him, please. We need to be loved. We need to be taken care, as Paul needed to be taken care. The man, poor chap, Paul only met with discouragement. From place to place he met with beating, harassment, and I'm sure Aquila and Priscilla took him in very often and gave him a good meal and said, Paul, please sit down, enjoy yourself. But he endears them, he loves them, and they loved him back in return, to work with him, to serve with him. They were tent makers, we are told. Yeah, we'll see that a little later. So, verse 3 tells us, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them. They lived together and they worked together. Why? Because they were all of the same trade. Paul was a tent maker. Now, please don't think that, oh, he made these little tents for children. No, he was in the real estate business. There weren't concrete structures at that time. You did have brick and mud structures, but a lot of people needed tents. Uh, Not only just those who are out in pastures, but also many who lived around a major city would live in tents. And Paul is a tent maker. He had a trade. He worked that trade. Now, interesting. He's going to work that trade because he wants to earn his keep. And I don't think we should have free lunches. Anybody, all ministers of God should work hard. All, yeah. uh, I think in as Catholic priests and as religious, we are loved and looked after by our congregations to a large extent, not to an extent of comfort. I am personally blessed, but a lot of us are looked after, are loved, are cared for. In Bombay Diocese, even our medical bills are taken care of, our hospitalization is taken care of. We are very well looked after, but therefore we have an obligation to work hard. Paul didn't believe in free lunches, though he will say in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 7 to 14, he'll recognize the need to be supported, that the clergy needs to be supported. The priestly tribe, the Levites, 1/10 of, remember, the Levites were not given any land. All the other tribes of Israel were given a piece of land, and therefore all the others had to give a tenth of their produce to the Levites who were working for God. That's how you get the tithe, 1/10, which I strongly recommend that every Christian stop. When you give, God will bless you. And I'm not saying give me, give to your church. Okay, I'm saying that very clearly. Uh, don't worry, God. I know friends who didn't even have a job and they consistently gave. I always talk about this young man, Shailesh. When Shailesh used to work for me, this is many years ago, he didn't have much education. I used to give him about 10,000 rupees, but every month he gave 1,000 rupees back to the church. That was a princely sum. And I want to tell you that today Shailesh is married. He has a beautiful daughter. He has a house in Mira Road. He has a fantastic job with my friend Eldridge. He is well loved, well looked after, uh, and God bless him. And there are many such people, I know. Many, many such people. So please remember that while in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7 to 14, Paul will speak of the laborer who deserves to be supported, and that's a very important thing. Paul himself worked. Okay, so no free lunches. We have to work. We have to do in sickness and in health. We are wedded to you. Okay, that's how it should be. Fourth, verse 4. Every Sabbath, Paul would, the word is argue, it's actually debate, discuss. He would go to the synagogue. So, Paul, no matter how many times he was rejected by his own people, he went to the synagogue. And he went because he had to convince the Jews. He had to convince, here it mentions Greeks, but he also had to convince the Gentiles because he was burning with fire. Monday to Saturday, he was a tent maker. Sunday, he was back again in the synagogue doing what he truly believed. Verse 7 tells us that he finally left the synagogue and he, oh, have I jumped a page? Yeah, I jumped a page. Verse 5. Uh, when Silas and Timothy arrived in Macedonia, Paul was occupied with proclaiming the word, testifying to the Jews that the Messiah was Jesus. Now, his friends have finally come back. Remember, Timothy and Silas had left him off in Beroa when there was a riot, and he was without his friends. His friends now join him. That must have been a great moment. Um, and now Paul puts aside his profession fully to devote himself to proclaiming the word of God, to testifying. You know, we may not have the ability to proclaim, but we can testify to what God did for us in our lives. That's the least we can do. So they, Paul and Timothy and Silas have come. Now we know from 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 6 to 10, that when they come, they bring also good news of what had happened in Thessalonica. Remember, uh, Paul had left Thessalonica because he was driven out of there. But we know later on that they bring good news that the people have remained steadfast. Those who followed Jesus had remained steadfast, and this made Paul very happy. And he wrote about this. He wrote about his happiness when he wrote to the Thessalonians from Corinth. So he writes the letter to the Thessalonians from Corinth saying how happy he is that people have remained steadfast. So here's a man, uh, great love for Jesus, great love for his mission, and he now focuses back on the ministry because his friends are back. His friends are here to share his workload. But does he always meet with success? No. Verse 6, when they opposed, who? The Jews opposed him in the synagogue, and then they reviled. Some translations have they blasphemed against Jesus in protest. Now watch. So they didn't really revile him, they blasphemed Jesus in protest, huh? Not because he had a bad hair day or because he just, got mad at all of them. In protest of their blaspheming against the one that he loved, he shook the dust off from his clothes. Jesus said, dust, shake the dust off your sandals. This man wanted to make a bigger scene. He must have taken off his entire garment, stood only in his loincloth. It must have been quite a sight. Paul was dramatic. Yeah, it was so dramatic. I want you to imagine this. They must have been shocked. Here's a half naked man with just a loincloth, taken off all his clothes, shaking it there and saying, I want nothing to do with you. You don't deserve the love of Jesus Christ. And he does this because they blasphemed. Huh? That's the better translation. Look what he says, your blood be on your own hands. It was a Jewish saying, but very similar. At the trial of Jesus, they said, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. And now he says, in a way, what they did in Jerusalem, you continue here in Corinth. He says, I'm innocent. From now on, I am going to the Gentiles. Verse 7. Then he left the synagogue and he went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshipper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. And I love this. Synagogue, Titus Justus's house, both side by side. When God closes a door, he opens a window. He always does that. The house was next door where he was welcomed. Now, let's understand something. Titus Justus is called a worshipper of God, which means that he was not a follower of Jesus Christ as yet. He was uncircumcised. He was a Gentile, must have been a Greek, but he attended synagogue because many of these, as we've seen before, were monotheists. Even though they were Gentiles, they had leanings towards Yahweh, towards the Jewish commandments. Now, I like the fact that Paul will keep reaching out to people again and again, but he doesn't suffer fools easily. Paul never suffered fools easily, um, and so he leaves. I don't think we should suffer fools. Sometimes, people ask silly questions. Not okay. I shouldn't say that because all questions are good and important. But there are some people who kind of needle you. Needle you. When people ask me a question, sometimes I say, "What's behind the question?" I like to know what's behind you asking the. What's in your mind? I learned this from a professor of ours, Father John DeMello. Whenever we asked him a question, he would say, "What's behind your question? First, tell me your bias." Yeah. So Paul never suffered fools easily. We should not suffer fools easily. Confront fools sometimes, but do it lovingly. Now, uh, one of the questions that crossed my mind this morning when I was preparing this is how could Paul really carry on? Where did he get the grace to carry on? From the Jews who reject him, he goes to the Gentiles. Uh, I want to share this with you. When you have a problem, there are two things you can do: fix your gaze on the problem or fix your eyes on Jesus. And many of us continue to fix our gaze on the problem and we get stuck. Our solutions cannot be found looking at a problem. Our solutions are found when we look at Jesus. Okay, Paul looked at Jesus. Verse 8 tells us that of another person, Crispus, who was an official in the synagogue, he became a believer in the Lord together with his household, and many of the other Corinthians who heard Paul also believed and were baptized. Now, Crispus was one of the few converts that Paul actually baptized. We know this from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 14. It's very interesting it's almost like saying the Pope baptized me. There are many people today in Peru who must be saying, oh, Pope Leo baptized us when he was a bishop or when he was a cardinal. That was the same joy that Crispus had. He was baptized personally. Uh, and from now on, we know that in tomorrow's text, verses 9 onwards, that Paul will stay in Corinth for another year and a half, okay, until there is another problem which you'll hear tomorrow, and he will have to move back to his base in Antioch. Two reflections quickly. Uh, Corinth was a city of sin, yet it provided a more fertile ground for the gospel than a very intellectual Athens. Don't rule out any place for God to work. Don't think that the intellectuals only will accept you. Sinners of Corinth might be waiting for you. Um, Also, Paul had to deal with persistent discouragement, persistent frustration. Paul needed encouragement. Who did he get it from? His co workers, Timothy and Silas. Who did he get it from? His friends, Priscilla and Aquila. I want you to encourage someone today, especially somebody who's been working a lot for the gospel, somebody who, a friend of yours who's sick with maybe cancer and is giving up, saying, I encourage you, I want to tell you I love you, I want to be there for you. Be a friend, everybody. Be a friend who perhaps prays for the other silently, a friend who picks up the phone and says, how are you? I miss you. I'm sorry I haven't kept in touch with you. I've been busy and but I love you. I think of you so often. Be encouraging. There could be a Paul somewhere right now who was discouraged, who was lonely, who was struggling, who ran out of money and had to work. Somebody needs our love. Somebody needs our affection. I will continue to teach you tomorrow. Is Friday, or rather, the next teaching is Friday, and then Saturday. Remember, I stop then for 15 days. God bless you, everybody. The Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Your part is to share this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't, and please leave your comments. Bye, everybody. God be with you.